Napoleon Bonaparte made kings kneel and empires crumble. The man was a military genius who reshaped the entire map of Europe. He was also chased away by rabbits, possibly lost his final battle because of haemorrhoids, and once failed to kill himself because his poison had gone stale. The Napoleonic Wars were brutal, bloody, and world-changing. They were also absolutely ridiculous. These are 33 of the dumbest facts from one of history's most serious conflicts. 1. In 1807, Napoleon decided to celebrate the Treaty of Tilsit with a fancy rabbit hunt. His chief of staff organized everything, gathering hundreds of rabbits in cages to be released for the emperor to shoot. Sounds like a relaxing afternoon for a world conqueror, right? Well, here is where it gets stupid. Instead of wild rabbits, the staff bought domesticated ones, farm bunnies, and when those cages opened, the rabbits did not run away in fear. No, they recognized humans as the creatures who bring food. So hundreds of hungry bunnies charged directly at Napoleon and his hunting party. The most powerful man in Europe, the terror of nations, was swarmed by fluffy little monsters climbing up his legs and coat. His guards tried beating them back with sticks. Napoleon himself retreated to his carriage. The rabbits followed. He fled the field that day, defeated not by the British, not by the Russians, but by an army of hungry bunnies who just wanted lunch. 2. The Battle of Waterloo in 1815 was the final showdown. Napoleon versus Wellington, the fate of Europe on the line. And according to one persistent historical theory, Napoleon lost partly because of his haemorrhoids. Seriously, the emperor reportedly suffered from a severe flare-up that day, so painful he could not sit on his horse properly to survey the battlefield and command his troops. Some historians argue this medical disaster delayed his orders by crucial hours. He allegedly spent the morning in agony, possibly taking laudanum for the pain, which might have clouded his judgment. Now, can we blame the entire defeat on his backside? Probably not. Wellington was brilliant. The Prussians showed up at the worst possible moment, and French coordination was a mess. But still, imagine being one of the greatest military minds in history, and your legacy includes the footnote. Might have lost his empire because sitting down hurt too much. History is not always dignified, folks. 3. In 1798, France actually invaded Ireland. About 1,000 French soldiers landed at Killala Bay to support an Irish rebellion against British rule. This was supposed to be a serious military operation, a second front to distract Britain. What actually happened? The French troops discovered Irish hospitality and Irish whiskey. The local rebels were thrilled to see their French allies, and celebrations began immediately. According to various accounts, instead of marching strategically and coordinating attacks, everyone just got absolutely hammered together. The French commander, General Humbert, reportedly had to drag his hungover troops into some semblance of order. They did win a couple of small engagements, but the whole operation fell apart within weeks. The British eventually surrounded them, the rebellion collapsed, and the great Franco-Irish alliance ended not with glory, but with what was essentially the worst group hangover in military history. The invasion failed, but hey, at least everyone had a good time. 4. Napoleon's first wife, Josephine, had a pug named Fortune. This little dog was her constant companion, her emotional support animal before that was even a concept. When Napoleon and Josephine finally married and the wedding night arrived, Fortune was not about to let some random Corsican general into his territory. The pug attacked. He bit Napoleon on the leg as the great commander tried to climb into bed with his new bride, and Josephine refused to remove the dog. So there is Napoleon, future emperor of France, conqueror of Italy, standing there bleeding from a pug bite, negotiating with a tiny flat-faced dog for access to his own marriage bed. According to Napoleon himself, he had to accept the situation, share the bed with Fortune or sleep elsewhere. The dog apparently made this a regular occurrence. One of the most powerful men who ever lived, bullied nightly by a 15-pound pug who simply refused to acknowledge his authority. 5. Admiral Horatio Nelson died heroically at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, shot by a French sniper while commanding the British fleet to victory. But getting his body back to England for a proper hero's funeral? That required some creative preservation. The ship's surgeon placed Nelson's corpse in a large barrel filled with brandy to prevent decomposition during the long voyage home. Here's where it gets weird. Sailors at the time had a serious drinking problem, and brandy was brandy. Rumors spread, and have persisted for 2 centuries, that crew members secretly drilled holes in the barrel and helped themselves to the admiral's preservative fluid. This possibly legendary act gave birth to the naval slang, tapping the admiral, meaning to sneak a drink. When the barrel was finally opened in England, it was reportedly much less full than expected. Did British sailors actually drink their dead hero's juice? We cannot prove it, but we also cannot prove they did not. And that uncertainty is somehow worse. 6. Napoleon absolutely hated losing. At anything, including casual card games with his own staff and courtiers, so he cheated, constantly and badly. The emperor would peek at other players' cards, change the rules mid-game, or simply declare himself the winner when things were not going his way. The funniest part? Everyone knew. His marshals, his ministers, visiting diplomats, they all watched him blatantly cheat and said absolutely nothing. What were they going to do? Accuse the Emperor of France of being a card shark? Call him out for palming an ace? People who annoyed Napoleon got sent to command freezing garrisons in the Alps. So everyone politely pretended not to notice as the most powerful man in Europe fumbled cards around like a desperate uncle at a family poker night. He won almost every game he played, surrounded by people working very hard to lose convincingly while keeping straight faces. 7. Napoleon wrote some truly passionate letters to Josephine, love letters that scholars still study today. And one particular line has achieved legendary status for being romantically disgusting. While away on campaign, Napoleon allegedly wrote to his wife asking her not to bathe before his return, because he adored her natural scent. He wanted the real Josephine experience, unwashed and authentic. Now, context matters here. Bathing in the late 18th century was not a daily ritual anyway, and ideas about attraction were different. But still, the man who reorganized European law, who commanded armies of hundreds of thousands, took time during military campaigns to write home, requesting his wife remain funky. Josephine, for her part, apparently did not share this enthusiasm for natural aromas. She was famous for loving perfume and bathing regularly. So we have a relationship dynamic where he wanted her sweaty, she preferred smelling like flowers, and somehow this marriage lasted over a decade. Romance is complicated. 8. In 1809, Napoleon had a pope problem. Pius the Seventh was not cooperating with French policies, excommunicating people Napoleon needed on his side, and generally being difficult. Napoleon's solution? Just kidnap the pope. French soldiers literally dragged the elderly pontiff out of the Vatican in the middle of the night and hauled him off to France. For the next 5 years, the leader of the Catholic Church was essentially a prisoner, moved between various locations under French guard. Napoleon wanted papal cooperation on everything from his divorce to controlling the church across his empire. Pius mostly refused, even while captive, which honestly takes serious backbone. The Pope outlasted Napoleon, eventually returning to Rome after the emperor's fall. But for half a decade, one man held both temporal and spiritual power hostage, proving that when Napoleon wanted something, international norms, religious authority, and basic decency were merely suggestions. 9. Feeding massive armies was a logistical nightmare, and Napoleon knew that hungry soldiers were useless soldiers. So in 1795, the French government offered a cash prize to anyone who could invent a better food preservation method. Nicholas Appert, a confectioner, figured out that food sealed in glass jars and boiled would last for months. By 1810, he had perfected the technique, and soon factories were producing tin cans full of preserved food for Napoleon's troops. Revolutionary, right? Except for one tiny problem. Nobody invented the can opener. That did not happen until 1855, almost 50 years later. So French soldiers carried these wonderful cans of preserved food and had to open them with bayonets, rocks, rifle butts, or whatever blunt instrument was available. Some just shot them open. The technology to preserve food arrived decades before the technology to conveniently access it. Soldiers literally hacked at their dinners like cavemen attacking a metal coconut. 10. When Napoleon was happy with someone, he had a peculiar way of showing affection. He would pinch them, hard, ears, cheeks, sometimes noses. He would grab a general who had just won a battle and twist his earlobe like a grandmother greeting a child she had not seen in years. This was supposed to be an honor. Being physically assaulted by the emperor meant he liked you. The problem was Napoleon did not always control his strength, and he also used pinching to intimidate or humiliate people he was annoyed with. So recipients never quite knew if they were being rewarded or punished. Imagine reporting a military victory and then having the most powerful man in Europe grab your face and squeeze until your eyes water. You just smile and say thank you. His inner circle walked around with sore ears constantly, never sure if the next imperial greeting would leave bruises. Affection and dominance, expressed through aggressive face-grabbing. 11. Britain developed the Congreve rocket, an early military rocket system meant to terrorize French forces. On paper, it sounded devastating. Explosive projectiles launched en masse, spreading fire and destruction across enemy lines. In reality, these rockets had the targeting accuracy of a drunk throwing darts blindfolded. They flew sideways, looped around, exploded prematurely, or just fizzled out pathetically. At the Battle of Leipzig, British rocket troops fired hundreds of these things, and the main casualties were horses on both sides who panicked from the noise and chaos. The rockets did produce spectacular psychological effects, mostly confusion and terror, but the terror was not limited to the French. Everyone on the battlefield, including British allies, learned to fear these unpredictable fire hazards. Sometimes they actually hit something useful. Mostly they just created expensive, dangerous fireworks displays. The French eventually learned to just let the rockets do their random thing and focus on enemies using weapons that actually aimed. 12. Everyone knows Napoleon was short, except he was not. The little corporal was actually around 5 feet 6 or 7 inches tall, which was perfectly average, even slightly above average, for a Frenchman of his era. So where did the myth come from? Partly British propaganda, which loved depicting him as a tiny, angry man throwing tantrums. Cartoonists like James Gilray drew him as a miniature tyrant, and the image stuck. But the real confusion came from measurement systems. French inches were longer than British inches. When Napoleon's height was recorded as 5 feet 2 inches in French measurements, British newspapers reported it using their own system without converting, making him sound tiny. Also, he was often surrounded by his imperial guard, soldiers specifically selected for being tall and intimidating, which made him look smaller by comparison. The Napoleon complex, named after a short man who was not actually short, might be history's most successful piece of fake news. 13. In 1803, Napoleon controlled a massive chunk of North America called Louisiana. We are talking about 828,000 square miles stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. And he sold the entire thing to the United States for about $15 million, roughly 4 cents per acre. Why would he dump such valuable real estate? Because he needed quick cash for his European wars, and his Caribbean ambitions had just collapsed spectacularly in Haiti. He figured if France could not hold the territory, better to sell it to America than let Britain take it. The Americans could not believe their luck. Jefferson had only asked to buy New Orleans, and suddenly Napoleon was offering half a continent. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States overnight. Napoleon got his war money, promptly spent it fighting enemies across Europe, and ultimately lost anyway. He basically funded America's expansion into a superpower to finance wars that ended with him on a tiny island. 14. Napoleon's handwriting was legendarily terrible. Not charmingly messy, but genuinely illegible. His letters looked like a spider dipped in ink, had a seizure across the page. His secretaries developed specialized skills in deciphering what he meant, and even they frequently guessed wrong. Generals receiving orders sometimes had to collaborate, comparing notes to figure out what they were supposed to do. Some reportedly mistook his writing for crude battlefield maps, trying to identify rivers and troop positions in what was actually just terrible penmanship. He wrote fast because his mind raced constantly, leaving his hand to produce something between shorthand and abstract art. Important military communications, documents that determined the fates of armies and nations, sometimes went misinterpreted because nobody could read them. The irony of a man who reorganized legal codes across Europe, who valued precision and efficiency, communicating through handwriting that looked like encrypted chaos. 15. Robert Fulton, the American inventor, approached Napoleon with a revolutionary weapon, a functioning submarine called the Nautilus. Fulton demonstrated the vessel in 1800, actually diving underwater and planting explosive charges on target ships. It worked. Napoleon could have had submarine warfare a century before World War I. He refused. The emperor reportedly called submarine attacks a sneaky, underhanded way to fight that no honorable nation should use. This from the man who kidnapped popes, sold continents, and made up card game rules. Fulton then offered the submarine to Britain, who also passed on it, fearing that if submarines became normal, their own naval superiority would be threatened. So both sides rejected the weapon that could have changed everything, because apparently drowning sailors in surface ships was honorable, but drowning them from below was rude. Fulton eventually gave up on submarines and invented the commercial steamboat instead. 16. Marshal Joachim Murat was one of Napoleon's best cavalry commanders. Brave, aggressive, brilliant at leading charges. He was also the most ridiculously dressed man in European military history. Murat designed his own uniforms, and his aesthetic can only be described as flamboyant peacock on stimulants. We are talking about pink and purple jackets, gold embroidery covering every surface, enormous feathered hats with ostrich plumes, leopard skin saddle covers, and enough jewelry to fund a small war. On actual battlefields, where people were shooting at him, his reasoning was that visible commanders inspired troops and terrified enemies. His enemy's reasoning was that he made an excellent target. Somehow he survived battle after battle, leading charges while dressed like he was attending the world's most aggressive fashion show. Napoleon tolerated this because Murat delivered results. When you win cavalry engagements this spectacularly, you can wear whatever you want. He eventually became King of Naples, where his wardrobe presumably got even more elaborate. 17. In 1799, Britain needed money to fight Napoleon. Prime Minister William Pitt introduced a tax on income as a temporary emergency measure, just until the war ended. People hated it, obviously, but they accepted temporary sacrifice for national survival. The war ended. The tax stayed. It was repealed briefly, then brought back for another war, then became permanent. That temporary wartime measure from 1799 evolved into the income tax systems that exist across the Western world today. British citizens have been paying a temporary Napoleonic war tax for over 200 years. Every time you see income tax deducted from your paycheck, thank Napoleon. He lost the war, but won the eternal battle of making governments realize they could tax earnings directly and people would eventually stop complaining. His most lasting impact on the world might not be the Napoleonic Code, but the annual ritual of tax season misery. 18. After his first abdication in 1814, Napoleon was done. Defeated, humiliated, exiled to Elba. He decided to end things permanently. He had been carrying a suicide pill around his neck since the Russian disaster, just in case. He swallowed the poison, expecting a dramatic imperial death. Instead, he spent the night violently vomiting. The poison had degraded over the years, losing its lethal potency. Rather than killing him, it just made him extremely sick. He survived his own suicide attempt because his emergency death pill had expired. His doctor helped him through the worst of it, and within months, Napoleon was plotting his escape and return to power. The man who conquered Europe could not even successfully poison himself. He would go on to escape Elba, march into Paris, rule for another 100 days, and lose at Waterloo before finally being exiled properly. All because he forgot to check the expiration date on his cyanide. 19. Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte started as a French soldier, rose through revolutionary ranks, became one of Napoleon's marshals, and then somehow ended up as the King of Sweden, The Swedish royal family was dying out, and the Swedish parliament needed a successor. They picked Bernadotte, a French marshal with zero Swedish ancestry, because he was competent, popular with soldiers, and might keep Napoleon friendly. Bernadotte accepted, moved to Sweden, changed his name to Charles John, and spent the rest of his career working against the man who had made him a marshal. He joined the coalition that finally defeated Napoleon, commanding troops against his former emperor at Leipzig. His descendants still rule Sweden today. The Swedish royal family is directly descended from a random French soldier who got promoted until another country just handed him a crown. Napoleon gave many men kingdoms. Only Bernadotte kept his by switching sides at exactly the right moment. 20. There is a popular story that Napoleon's troops used the Great Sphinx of Giza for target practice during the Egyptian campaign, shooting off its nose with cannon fire. It makes a great tale about arrogant European soldiers destroying ancient wonders. The only problem is, it probably did not happen. Drawings from before Napoleon's invasion already show the Sphinx without its nose. The damage likely occurred centuries earlier, possibly from a medieval Sufi who was upset about Egyptians treating the statue with religious reverence. But the myth persists because it fits perfectly into narratives about imperial destruction and cultural vandalism. French soldiers in Egypt did plenty of actual damage and looting, so blaming the nose on them felt believable. Napoleon himself was fascinated by Egyptian antiquities and brought scholars specifically to study them. His troops may have been guilty of many things, but Sphinx vandalism probably was not among them. 21. Napoleon was obsessive about personal hygiene, which sounds contradictory given his "do not bathe" letter to Josephine. He bathed frequently himself, sometimes spending hours in hot baths while working, dictating letters and receiving reports while soaking. His personal travel kit included what many consider an early form of the modern toothbrush, with a bone handle and boar bristle head, far more sophisticated than the chew sticks many people still used. He brushed his teeth daily, unusual for the era. He also used cologne excessively, going through bottles of the stuff, which is actually where the term eau de cologne gained popularity. So we have a man who wanted his wife unwashed but kept himself immaculately clean, bathed constantly, brushed religiously, and smelled like a perfume shop. His personal hygiene standards were probably a century ahead of his time. His romantic preferences regarding hygiene were apparently a century behind. 22. Before Napoleon, European traffic was chaotic, with different regions following different rules about which side of the road to use. Many countries, including Britain, traditionally kept left. Napoleon standardized right-side driving across his empire. Why? Possibly practical, possibly psychological warfare. One theory suggests that right-side traffic was associated with the revolutionary rejection of aristocratic customs. Another theory claims Napoleon wanted to confuse enemies accustomed to left-side movement. His armies marched on the right, his empire drove on the right, and countries he conquered adopted the system. After his fall, most of these countries just kept the habit. Today, about 70% of the world drives on the right, largely because Napoleonic influence spread across continental Europe and then to their colonies. Britain and its former colonies kept left, remaining defiant. Every time you drive on the right side of the road, you are following a traffic pattern established by a Corsican emperor who has been dead for 2 centuries. 23. Napoleon sent his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, to Haiti with about 40,000 elite French soldiers. Their mission: crush the Haitian Revolution and restore slavery to France's most profitable colony. It should have been straightforward. Instead, it became a catastrophe. The Haitians fought brilliantly under leaders like Toussaint Louverture, but their greatest ally was yellow fever. The disease tore through French ranks with horrifying speed. Leclerc himself died of it. Thousands of Europe's best soldiers dropped dead without ever seeing combat. By the time the survivors retreated, France had lost an entire army primarily to mosquitoes. The defeat was so complete that Napoleon abandoned all his American ambitions, leading directly to the Louisiana Purchase. Haiti became the first free black republic in the Western Hemisphere, winning independence partly through military skill and partly because tropical disease accomplished what bullets alone might not have. The mosquitoes of Haiti changed the map of 2 continents. 24. Napoleon believed in family. Unfortunately, his family was spectacularly unqualified for the thrones he kept giving them. He made his brother Joseph king of Naples, then Spain. Joseph was a decent diplomat, but a terrible warmonger, and Spain became a bleeding ulcer of guerrilla warfare. Brother Louis became king of Holland and immediately went native, actually caring about Dutch interests instead of French ones, which infuriated Napoleon. Brother Jerome got Westphalia, and mostly through expensive parties. Sister Caroline and her husband Murat got Naples after Joseph left, and they eventually betrayed Napoleon. Brother Lucien refused a throne because Napoleon wanted to control his marriage, showing rare family spine. The Bonaparte family reunions must have been incredibly awkward after 1815, with multiple ex-kings arguing about whose kingdom had collapsed most embarrassingly. Napoleon's greatest military weakness might have been nepotism, promoting blood relatives over competent alternatives. 25. Napoleon claimed he could sleep on command, anywhere, for exactly as long as he chose. Battlefield reports suggest this was not exaggeration. He would curl up during active bombardments, nap for 15 or 20 minutes, then wake up completely refreshed and ready to command. During the brutal Russian campaign, officers reported him sleeping in carriages, on the ground, and once apparently while sitting on a horse. His ability to function on minimal, strategically timed sleep gave him advantages over enemies who needed normal rest. He could stay awake for days during crucial campaigns, napping in fragments, while opposing generals made exhausted mistakes. Some historians credit this bizarre sleep pattern as a genuine tactical asset. He was not a military genius who happened to sleep weirdly. The weird sleeping might have been part of what made him a military genius. 4 hours total per night, broken into efficient chunks while his enemies desperately needed 8. 26. The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic armies were systematic looters of European art. Italy suffered particularly badly. Napoleon's forces stripped Venice, Florence, Rome, and dozens of other cities of paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, and anything else culturally valuable. The famous bronze horses of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, which had already been looted from Constantinople centuries earlier, got looted again and shipped to Paris. The Louvre filled up with stolen masterpieces from across the conquered territories. French officials even created bureaucratic systems for cataloging and transporting plunder, giving theft an administrative veneer of legitimacy. After Napoleon's defeat, some items were returned. Many were not. The horses went back to Venice. Countless other pieces stayed in French collections. Napoleon genuinely appreciated art and believed Paris deserved to be the cultural capital of the world. He just felt that entitled him to take everyone else's cultural heritage by force. 27. The British naval blockade strangled French trade, cutting off access to Caribbean sugar. Sugar had become essential to European diets and economies, and suddenly there was none. Napoleon, never one to accept defeat by economic circumstance, demanded a solution. Scientists pointed to sugar beets as a possible alternative. They contained sugar, just in smaller concentrations than cane. Napoleon threw resources at beet sugar production, subsidizing farms, funding research, building processing facilities. Within years, beet sugar factories operated across the empire. The product was inferior initially, but it existed. After Napoleon fell, the technology did not vanish. European beet sugar production continued developing, eventually becoming competitive with cane sugar. Today, about 20% of global sugar comes from beets, all because a British blockade forced a desperate emperor to fund agricultural research. Every sugar beet in the world exists partly because Napoleon needed to satisfy Europe's sweet tooth without Caribbean imports. 28. In 1803, Napoleon was traveling by carriage when he decided for some reason to take the reins himself. Emperor of France, conqueror of Italy, master of Europe, and he wanted to play coachman. The results were predictable. He lost control, the carriage crashed, and Napoleon was thrown violently, injuring his neck and coming terrifyingly close to death. This was before Austerlitz, before Jena, before all his greatest victories. The entire subsequent history of Europe almost changed because one man could not resist grabbing some horse reins. His staff reportedly begged him afterward to never drive anything ever again. He mostly complied, though not out of safety concerns, more because emperors did not perform servant tasks. The man who survived dozens of battles, assassination attempts, and one failed self-poisoning nearly killed himself in a carriage accident caused entirely by ego and boredom. 29. Ludwig van Beethoven admired Napoleon intensely. Here was a revolutionary leader, a man of the people rising through merit, reshaping Europe's old aristocratic order. Beethoven composed his Third Symphony specifically as a tribute, planning to title it Bonaparte. Then in 1804, Napoleon crowned himself emperor, abandoning republican ideals for personal glory. Beethoven flew into a rage. According to witnesses, he grabbed the title page of his symphony and scratched out Napoleon's name so violently that he tore through the paper. The dedication was gone, replaced eventually by the title Eroica, meaning heroic, dedicated vaguely to the memory of a great man. Not Napoleon specifically, just the idea of what Napoleon could have been. Beethoven felt personally betrayed, watching his hero become exactly the kind of tyrant the revolution had supposedly overthrown. The symphony remains one of the greatest ever written. Its almost dedication remains one of history's most dramatic acts of artistic disappointment. 30. Napoleon marched into Russia with over 600,000 soldiers, the largest army Europe had ever seen. He expected the Russians to fight, lose, sue for peace, standard procedure. Instead, the Russians kept retreating, burning everything behind them, leaving nothing for the French to eat or use. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow in September 1812, he expected surrender. Keys to the city, negotiations. He got an empty city. The Russians had evacuated almost everyone, and then, instead of handing over their ancient capital, they burned it themselves. Fires broke out everywhere, destroying 3/4 of Moscow while Napoleon watched helplessly. He waited a month for surrender negotiations that never came. With winter approaching and his army starving, he had to retreat through the same scorched wasteland he had crossed coming in. He entered Russia with 600,000 men. Fewer than 100,000 made it back. The Russians beat Napoleon by refusing to fight and destroying their own city. 31. The Battle of Austerlitz. In December 1805 was Napoleon's masterpiece, and his enemies practically defeated themselves. The Austrian and Russian emperors were both present, commanding personally, and their combined forces significantly outnumbered Napoleon's army. They should have won. Instead, they attacked exactly where Napoleon wanted them to, weakening their center while trying to flank him. Morning fog helped hide French movements until it was too late. When Napoleon counterattacked through the weakened center, the Allied army simply collapsed. Thousands of Russian soldiers drowned when they fled across frozen ponds, and the ice broke under them, possibly helped by French artillery firing at the surface. 3 emperors fought that day. Only one knew what he was doing. The Allied commanders had been so confident they were springing a trap that they never realized they were walking into one. Napoleon called it his greatest victory, and the men who lost to him made it remarkably easy. 32. Napoleon was exiled to Elba in 1814, a tiny Mediterranean island where he was supposed to stay forever. He stayed about 10 months. His escape was almost comically easy. He gathered about 1,000 loyal soldiers, loaded them onto small ships, and simply sailed away. A British naval vessel actually spotted his flotilla, but reportedly did not investigate closely enough to realize the Emperor of France was escaping right past them. Some historians suggest the captain was bribed. Others think he just assumed no one would be stupid enough to try something so obvious. Napoleon landed in southern France and started walking toward Paris. The king sent armies to stop him. Those armies joined him instead. Within 3 weeks, he was back in power, the king had fled, and all of Europe was scrambling to mobilize again. The entire Allied security system designed to keep Napoleon contained failed because one ship did not look too carefully at some boats. 33. When Napoleon landed in France and began marching toward Paris, King Louis XVIII sent the 5th Regiment to arrest or kill him. These were veteran soldiers, many of whom had served under Napoleon before, now ordered to destroy their former emperor. The two forces met near Grenoble. Napoleon, rather than ordering an attack or negotiating from safety, walked forward alone. He approached the regiment, opened his coat, exposed his chest, and reportedly shouted, "Soldiers of the 5th, if any of you wishes to shoot his emperor, here I am." Nobody fired. After a moment of silence, the regiment started shouting, "Vive l'Empereur," and switched sides on the spot. It was the most dramatic recruitment speech in history. A single man convinced an entire armed regiment to commit treason through sheer personal charisma and one incredible gamble. Word spread, more regiments defected, and within weeks, Napoleon ruled France again. Whatever his flaws, the man absolutely understood theatrical timing. Wars that killed millions, ended empires, and redrew continents. Also featuring bunny attacks, drunk invasions, and a general dressed like a carnival float. That was the Napoleonic era. Now settle this. Napoleon, military genius or the luckiest man in Europe who eventually ran out of luck? Pick your side and defend it. Like if your brain enjoyed this chaos, and subscribe because next time we are going somewhere even weirder